Hello, everyone. It's the Underdogs back with you. I'm Jordan Brenner, joined as always by my co-host Peter Keating. Peter, it's a chilly, snowy day here in the Northeast. How are you holding up?
Jordan, I'm doing great. As you may know, I've had COVID. I've tested positive. I'm about to escape the basement. This is it. This is it. I'm ready. I'm ready to take off like it's springtime for Pete.
Some of our listeners think you may never escape the basement, whether you're sick or
Well,
not. So this
that's because
is,
they see me here all the time, Jordan. That's
yes, yes,
the
that's what it
basement.
is.
The
Well,
basement is the studio. You know.
yes. Well, later in the show, we are going to talk about some other teams in the basement of the NBA
That's right. That's right.
and just how amazing a collection of bad teams we have this year and some interesting things you might not realize about what's going on. And then Peter's got a little bit of a tennis hot tip for you heading into the Australian Open, which is getting started. But first, we're right in the thick of the NFL playoffs right now. Just finished Super Bowl wild card weekend. We had a pair of slight home underdogs both win. Those would be the Buccaneers and the Texans. And of course, the big one of the weekend, Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers taking down America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. Easily the biggest upset of the weekend. They'll head to San Francisco. Peter, what'd you think of this weekend's games, and what are we looking at as we got four underdogs on the docket in the divisional round?
Look, Jordan, we noted that we couldn't see a lot of value in the underdog plays, right? But underdogs did do well. And we also noted that Dallas had the kind of very variable performance, particularly on defense, that could make them vulnerable. We just didn't see them as being that vulnerable. I'm still kind of recovering from the fact that Dallas got smoked. I mean, this is a team that played exceptionally well at home. Um, Green Bay is one of those interesting and unusual teams that have taken substantial improvement, not just the illusion of momentum, and extended it into even better play in the playoffs. I think they qualify as a different team than they were, let's say, 8 or 9 weeks ago.
Right, and we talked about that, how momentum may not matter late in the season, but teams do change in terms of young players improving, especially in terms of health. And
Yeah.
just look at the Green Bay wide receiver room for an example of how that's coming together at the right time. Green Bay is now a 9.5 point underdog at San Francisco this weekend. You know that I've said the 49ers are the best team in football by a fairly large margin all year. I still feel that way even after they lost to the Ravens, but I think we have divergent takes on this game. Green Bay clearly the biggest underdog left in the playoffs. So you think they have a fighting chance to stay in this thing?
I do. And I think that we have to be careful about assuming about our assumptions about number one overall seeds, about teams playing at home, and about teams getting some rest. Over the past 20 years, number one seeds are just 35% against the spread in the divisional round. And if you lose your last game, and remember the Niners lost, they weren't trying hard, but they did lose in week 18 for whatever reason. If you lose, if you're on a one-game losing streak and you're a home team in the divisional round, those teams are just 3-15. Okay. Meanwhile, road teams that missed the previous season's playoffs are 68%, 27-15. There's kind of a formula there where a rapidly improving young team on the road that's doing well against a team that hasn't played in a while or maybe lost the last game they play, the signals are pretty interesting. I
Yeah.
think
I
I think
wonder
there's a
about
much
trends. I wonder
well,
about
but I think
trends like
there.
that.
Oh, okay, but let's say you line up signals for both teams, okay?
Right.
Um, most of these games, including Baltimore and Houston, including Buffalo and Kansas City, are pretty one-sided in which way the signals are flashing. In this
Hmm.
game, you can line up all the trends and all the signals, and it's our job to usually pick through the ones we like and don't like. Trends are pretty even. The signals are really interesting. I think the Niners are going to have more of a fight on their hands because Green Bay is definitely going to be able to move the ball. I also think the Niners defense, particularly their rushing defense, and Aaron Jones has been rejuvenated and the Green Bay running game has been working really well off the passing game and vice versa. I think Green Bay is going to be able to score in this game. And so I think, the over's 50.5, and I think the teams will probably both score at least 20, 25 points. And I think San Francisco's in for more of a fight than we might think just looking at San Francisco's season-long statistics.
I'm not sure I agree with you.
I mean, Jordan Love, that Jordan, 19 touchdowns, one
Not me.
interception over the
I
last,
I
the
hear you.
last
I
half of the
just
season.
think the Niners are a huge step up. I do want to get to the Green Bay as an underdog in a bigger picture sense, in sort of how they built this team. But real quick, first, just a little bit of a betting preview here. So we mentioned that's a 9.5 point spread. The Ravens are 9 point favorites against the Texans. Detroit is a 6 point favorite against the Bucks, and the Bills are 3 points favorites against the Chiefs. Two things I want to point out real quick. One, I really like the favorites to win outright here. So you can possibly put together some money line parlays. I just I have real problems with all these underdogs. And actually, I think the weakest one of them all is the Buccaneers. I love the Lions -6. I think they'll win more of a touchdown. The Bucks beat a decimated,
Yep.
dead, deflated team in the Eagles, but as people would say, this is the peak of the market for Tampa. This was a team that was not very good all season long. Detroit is a massive step up in competition. Tampa Bay's pass defense is not good. Detroit at home can throw the ball all over the yard, and I don't think Tampa will be able to match them point for point. The other interesting thing you can look at with some of these games is one of my favorite plays, which is a teaser. If you remember, Peter, a teaser is where you combine. It's a type of parlay where you combine at least two games. You get a typical teaser is 6 points. So, for instance, in a 6 point teaser, you with the Lions, you would take them from a 6 point favorite to pick them. Essentially, you would tease the Ravens down from +9, sorry, from -9 to -3. You have to win
Mm-hmm.
both games. Typically, at DraftKings, they offer -120 odds for a two-team teaser. I think there's lots of combinations here. Whether you're, like I said, 7 and 3 are key numbers and teasers. You could take the Ravens down to a field goal. That's big. Watch the Niners line. You might be able to do the same. And even though I like the Bills to win outright, you could take the Chiefs up to +9 as well. So think about teasers this weekend. I have
Did you
already
ask
put
me
some
if
on.
I remembered what a teaser was? Jordan, you described teasers and your daily fantasy strategies to Sarah and me, or you're betting your teasers, your lines,
Hmm.
uh, incessantly. How could I not remember what a teaser is? So thank
I'm
you for that.
used to most people not paying attention to what I say. That's
Thank you for
granted. That's in my
refreshing us
house, but
on the
yes,
tease. Yes.
yes.
To jump back for 1 second,
Okay.
Green Bay's +340 on the money line. I mean, that's a 23% chance of winning. Do you think Green Bay has a 23% or less chance of winning?
I don't think they have a 23% chance of winning. I think San Francisco, like I said, I look, Dallas moved the ball up and down the field against Green Bay. It's not like Green Bay's defense impressed me. They had a couple turnovers on just fluke bad plays. San Francisco's offense is that much better than Dallas's, more balanced. They've had 2 weeks of rest. They're healthy. I don't see Green Bay getting stops at all. And I do. San Francisco's defense is just better than Dallas as well. So
Yeah, but Jordan, for most of that game, they were playing with a 20 or 30 point lead. I mean, I think
I'm
they
not.
may have let up a little more than the numbers or even our own eyes indicate.
This is the same Green Bay team that let Tommy DeVito lead
Oh,
a
Jordan, that
fourth
was the
quarter comeback
last
drive not that long
that was the
ago.
last time they looked like that Green Bay all season.
Look, I just
They're also the only underdog. They're also the only playoff team that won any game this year against a team that made the playoffs, being an underdog by a touchdown or more.
I'm
Only
not
only
going to change my opinion on San Francisco now. I believe in them. I think they're the best team in football. I think they're going to win the Super Bowl, and I think it starts with a relatively easy win against Green Bay. But what interests me, Peter, about Green Bay.
I will say I think Baltimore is the best team, and I think Baltimore will be able to move the ball surprisingly well. Baltimore throws on early downs more often than people think, and I think they're going to be able to do that.
Oh, the Texans are a
They're
pass
going to do
funnel
that
to
with
begin with.
impunity against
The
Houston, who's
Texans
a little
stop the run
banged
pretty
up.
well, but they've been shredded by the pass all year. I
Yeah,
think Lamar Jackson's going to have a field day.
yeah,
But
I agree
Peter,
with
the
that.
interesting thing about Green Bay, before we move on to terrible basketball teams, is the way they're rebuilding on the fly. Okay,
Yes.
a lot of attention paid, obviously, to the quarterback transition. Clearly, they found another one. The succession from Favre to Rodgers to Love is pretty impressive. But as a New York Giants fan who forgets what a good offensive line looks like, their two starting tackles, offensive tackles, who are doing an excellent job, were a seventh round pick in the 2022 draft and a fourth round pick in the 2022 draft. It goes to show you there is value late in drafts. And I think this is a point we're going to have to talk about at a later date as well as we get closer to the draft. Is there something about the way these teams develop these players with their offensive line coach, or why is it so hard for some teams to find a good offensive lineman, and why are the Packers able to find bookend tackles late in the draft 2 years ago?
Sure. To have those picks hit in the 7th and the 4th round, you have to have 7th and 4th round picks. The Packers had 13 draft picks last year, right? So this is not just about hitting, it's about stockpiling the draft picks, because Jordan, they were not drafting at the top of each round. They were in the middle of each round, right? So their draft, I mean, it's important that they did well in scouting and developing, but to begin with, they had all those picks. And also, I mean, if you miss on a 7th round pick, nobody's going to care. But if you hit on one, it's enormous value. So the risk reward in stockpiling those later round draft picks is pretty high. And of course, it's not just the tackles; it's also the receivers. I mean, Jalen Reed, Dontavius Wicks. I mean, they hit on them too, which has been amazing to watch, because those are the players who have actually grown into being real top shelf starters over the second half of the season.
Well, one sport where the draft really matters at the top, and where there's an amazing battle going on to see who will get the first pick.
Well, you'd think it would matter. You'd think it would matter at the top.
That's right, the NBA, and we'll be back to talk about that, dumpster fire right after this. We're back. And if you haven't been paying attention to the NBA much this year because you're a crazy football fan, you are missing out on some historic futility. You probably know that the Detroit Pistons lost 28 straight games at one point and that they're 4-36. What you don't know is they're still barely the worst team in the NBA, because there are 5 teams that are historically bad, that are, each of them is being outscored by at least 9 points per game. The Pistons are 4-36. The Spurs are 7-32. The Wizards are 7-32. The Hornets are 8-29 and being outscored by the most points. That's 11.8 points per game. And coming in strong, the Portland Trailblazers, losers of 4 straight, they're 10-29 and being outscored by 9.8 points per game. Peter, simply put, we have never seen anything like this.
We have never seen anything. You're right, like this. There are all kinds of different ways you can try to statistically rank teams by how bad they are. Now, you could just look at how widely they're being outscored. But in an era where there's lots of points being scored per game, and pace goes up and down from year to year, maybe you want to look at something else. But there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can look at how many standard deviations worse than average a team is. In other words, given the spread in all teams, how far below that spread are the worst teams? There's no contest. Usually we get a team or two that's a couple of standard deviations below average. You'd expect that. You expect 5% of all teams to be about 25 or 30 games worse than average. This year we have 4 or 5. You can also just look at the simple rating system, which basically just looks at a team's scoring margin and adjusts it by its strength of schedule. What's amazing about looking at these bad teams statistically, Jordan, is that when you look at them, different depths of how bad they are begin to emerge. For example, the Pistons have been a little unlucky this year, believe it or not. So have the Spurs. But by simple rating system, the Charlotte Hornets are the worst team by a huge margin. Their simple rating system score is below -14. In other words, after adjusting for schedule strength, they're more than 14 points below average. You're getting outscored by more than 14 points. That's on pace to be the very worst mark in NBA history. So you have a batch of teams further below average than have ever been that deep in the hole before in league history.
It certainly makes these guys the ultimate underdogs for our show. They're underdogs every night, and in a massive form.
Jordan, Jordan, we laugh when you say that, but of the 4 worst teams, how many are going to be favored in any game that they play the rest of this entire season? I'm not sure.
Only when they play each other.
Right,
only
exactly.
When they play each other.
Outside our select group of basement dwellers, I don't think anyone's going to be favored to win any contest. no matter who they're facing, no matter where they're facing them the rest of the entire year.
Well, it's also somewhat artificially inflating the top and especially the middle class. I think you've got 17 or 18 teams with winning records right now, and another couple that are right on the verge, like the Rockets and the Warriors. So you're gonna have winning records making the play-in, the lower parts of the play-in round. So
Well,
they're
what's
just beating
interesting
up on
though,
these teams.
but there's no team that has that it's on a pace to win, let's say 65 or 70 games, right? In other words, this it's not a it's not a two-tailed duck here that we're talking about. The horror shows that we're seeing on the bottom are not being matched by super inflated totals at the very, very top. What's happened is the kind of the bottom has fallen out of the B minus to C minus teams, right? Last year, Portland had the fifth worst record in the league, but they won 33 games.
Right.
Teams are not anywhere in that neighborhood.
So what I'm even more interesting than just how historic this is why it's happening. I was talking to a former team executive yesterday, and he was saying that the interesting thing is for years we've been told that the incentives for a top draft pick cause tanking, and tanking causes these terrible teams. However, one, this is a historically bad draft coming up, so the incentives are lower. Two, there are fewer teams openly tanking right now than we've seen in years. That's just a fact. If you look at the moves teams have made, particularly these. So the incentives aren't there, and the strategy is not there. So, right, you've got the Wizards who just started a reset, but they've made moves like re-signing Kyle Kuzma that you don't do if you're just trying to lose games, adding Tyus Jones. Those are not moves that like the Sam Hinkie 76ers ever would have made, right? Detroit, they're building through the draft. They have several high draft picks: Jalen Duren, Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey. They've retained a player like Bojan Bogdanovic, again, a type of player who you would trade if you were trying to tank. The Spurs already got their prize in Victor Wembanyama. The Blazers just traded Lillard. They're too early in the process to even be tanking because they're still changing that roster, etc. So and Charlotte has just been decimated by injuries on a young roster, but it's just it's like a weird perfect storm of other things happening to cause these teams to be this bad.
Yeah, usually, I mean, you'd expect some effect somewhere, right? Like it's like, but these are not expansion teams. I mean, some expansion teams throughout league history have been some of the worst we've ever seen, and they're not. You're right. They're not overtly tanking teams. Some of the worst teams ever, as measured by some of these pace adjusted or scoring margin adjusted metrics, like I think the 2014 or 15 Sixers, 2021 Thunder, maybe an old Mavericks or old Rockets teams. Some of those teams obviously were in the throes of tanking, right? These teams feel more like what's the worst team you've ever seen? The Bobcats when they finished the season on a 23 game losing streak. And that team clearly wasn't tanking because they were something like 13 or 16 games out of next to last place. They were just that bad. Or maybe the Sixers that had that 9
But
win
that was a
season.
tanking team. That was a team that was clearly going through the process, right? Like
No. I mean the earlier one, the one in the 70s.
oh, the earlier. Oh, yes. I wasn't around for that one, Peter.
Right. I mean, it was that was just the team that was caught between the Wilt days and the Dr. J days.
Yes, if
right?
anyone remembers the 73 Sixers who would like to chime in with comparisons to this group, please let us know.
Well, I did mention the Bobcats first.
Yes.
But let me just press you on that just a little, though.
Okay.
How many of these teams are not destroying themselves in order to get good draft picks, but recovering from being at the bottom rung where they sent themselves to try to get? I mean,
I think that's happening. I mean,
that's obviously happening with the Spurs, right? To a limited extent, it might be happening with the Pistons. I don't know.
Right. The Spurs tanked a little bit to get Wemby, but I don't think the goal is for them now to lose as many as possible. They've got a young core. They're trying to add to that. I don't think it's like, well, let's lose. They're bringing Wemby. Everything's about Wemby at this point. Okay, Charlotte, hold on. Charlotte has sort of refused to tank. They've tried to mix young players with veterans, and they've sort of been like one of those teams that would be very happy to win 42 games a year, and like they just haven't managed themselves well. What I was thinking about, though, is which of these teams might be best positioned to get out of this the quickest. And I keep coming back to Detroit, actually. And here's why, okay? I mentioned those 3 or 4 young players who certainly Kate Cunningham's played very well. Jaden Ivey has not lived up to being a top 5 pick yet, but is showing some signs. I like Jalen Duren. The biggest thing about that team, even more so after they made this trade with the Wizards the other day, is they've got $60 million in cap space this summer. So if they want to, they're going to be able to go out and try to add some impactful players that can take this team pretty quickly, I think, if the young players seem to progress from a historically bad team to a mediocre team.
Okay, so first of all, what was up with the Wizards side of that trade?
I think they may think Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Livers have some ability to contribute as a young team. They're not going to be doing anything in free agency. They're probably rolling the dice on it.
Well,
I do think it was
so
weird.
those are the players they're banking on to take them from like a 10 to a 14 win season, and in return for that, they've given Detroit the flexibility team, or they've helped them
I'm
at
not
least
saying these
get
teams
the
are well
flexibility they need to
managed.
go out and make some moves.
Right. There's a reason they're at the bottom of the rung to begin with, and you know it is what it is. They're down below, and you know what else is down below or down under? That's right, the Australian Open underway, and we'll have Peter's hot fuzzy balls return with tennis right after this. All right, before we go, we'd like to give you a little bit of advice. Maybe you want to bet on the Australian Open. Maybe you just like watching tennis. Peter's studied the numbers, and I think he's got a couple interesting picks for you.
I got at least one, Jordan. Yeah, I think there's significant value in betting Yannick Sinner, the Italian guy, to win the Australian Open. Right now, he's plus 600. Play is already underway. Few reasons. He's seeded 4th, but he has the second highest ELO rating, or current performance rating, in the world compared to all other players, according to Tennis Abstract, an excellent statistical website. Tennis ratings, traditional tennis ratings, are usually a pretty good indicator, as are betting markets, of where players stand. But in some cases, when players are very young and improving very rapidly, current performance, their ELO, especially if there's nothing crazy going on with surfaces, is an even better indicator of who's playing right now and who has the best odds right now. Given the Tennis Abstract data, he has about a 30% chance of winning this. It's a pretty high number. It's about a 19.
Sinner, of course, is already into the 3rd round.
Yeah, and he's blown away the opposition.
Yep. And
he's only 22. He's a great forehander, but he has the best backhand of anybody in the world. He's improving rapidly. The topspin on his backhand is really something to see. He's an interesting player to watch. There's no comparable gap in the betting odds among other players, men or women. He also has a great draw. He has the easiest path to the quarterfinals, or at least the semifinals.
Well, he'll face his first seeded player in the 3rd round. That's Sebastian Baez. Believe that is Friday Australia time, but probably what's that, Thursday here?
Yeah, and his 3 seeded opponents that are likely to face him in this part of the draw are all actually a little worse on ELO than they are given in their world ratings. They have not been playing great, or they're a little older. There's reasons to dislike each of his upcoming seeded opponents.
So what are the odds again if I want to bet him at this point?
Plus 600 to win, but let me give you a couple of other things. You can also take Sinner to get eliminated in the finals. In other words, to make it to the finals, but probably lose to Djokovic. That's plus 750. And there's an interesting bet on
wait, it's actually shorter odds to bet him to win than to lose in the finals?
To get to the finals and lose, not to be eliminated before the finals, but to lose in that specific round.
Interesting.
You can bet elimination rounds. Yeah.
Okay.
He's actually only plus 175 to make the semifinals, which is an indication of how good this draw is. There's also a next gen special bet on DraftKings where you can bet on Carlos Alcaraz, Sinner, or Holger Rune to win at plus 160. And if you think Djokovic is ready to finally be taken down by somebody, that's a kind of an interesting little bet. But I think Sinner's where the value is, and I don't see anyone out of line the way his betting odds are on either side, like I said, the way he is.
Well, I'd rather laugh with the Sinner than cry with the Saints. Sinner's just more fun. So on that note,
Jordan, only my good bets die young.
Yeah. Well, for Billy Joel and Peter Keating, I'm Jordan Brenner. We'll see you next week.
Go Pistons.